to Michael and Tina Cole for hosting. It's such a pleasure to be here, and you've even organised fantastic weather for us this evening, so thank you so much. And thank you so much to each and every one of you for coming and joining part 2 of our series of 4, possibly 6. We're going through Pirkei Avot. And just a brief recap, we're out of sheets, I'm afraid. These are my sheets. So if you could just share sheets 1 between 2, I'd appreciate it.
Everybody's willing to share their sheet.
Anyone need another one?
So just a brief recap for those people who were not able to join us last week, just to tell you what we did. We started off last week discussing the concept of a Mishnah. We explained it's an anagram for Neshama. We explained that it's particularly appropriate to be learning Mishnayot in memory of Russell, and that was why we chose the concept of Mishnah. And all the learning this evening is Le'ilu Nishmat Reuven ben Nachman, and also a refuah shlema for Giddy Abrahams. Michael Abrahams just phoned me, he couldn't come. Giddy's not so well, so he's asked me that we should learn that he should have a refuah shlema as well. So just to begin, we talked last week that the Mishnah is split into 6 different sections. We explained that it talks about seeds, agricultural law, festivals, women, marriage, divorce, holy things, purities, nazikin, etc., etc. And then we went through 5 or 6 Mishnayot, and I'm sure everybody did their homework and finished the first chapter. And for those of you who didn't, don't worry, we won't be checking. But tonight we start chapter 2. So we're going to try and get through as many Mishnayot as we can, and we'll see how we go. Please, can we make this interactive? If you do not agree with what I say, please heckle. If you don't understand, please ask. If you have a question, please challenge us. And anything I can't answer, my Rebbitzin has just arrived, so I'll direct you in her direction. Okay, so week number 2, chapter number 2, Mishnah 1. So if you look at the top of your source sheets, and I'm going to invite Kathy to read for us the first Mishnah of Perek Sheni. Please, Kathy.
Rabbi says, which is the straight path that a man should choose for himself? One which is an honor to the person adopting it, and on account of which honor accrues to him from others.
Pause there. Okay.
So I'm translating from the French, please.
Right.
Sorry.
Rebbe said, it begins Rebbe Omer. Now, who is Rebbe? Who is Rabbi? It could be referring to so many different rabbis. So we know that Rebbe was the title given to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, who, as we spoke about last week, he was the one who redacted all the Mishnah. He wrote it down. He was possibly the greatest rabbi of all time in many ways, because without him, a lot of the oral law would have been forgotten. We spoke last week about the idea that when the temple was destroyed, Jews were exiled throughout the diaspora, and as a result, there was a big fear the Mishnah would be lost. Along comes this amazing man, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, and he writes it down in the Mishnah. By the way, just for your understanding, the Mishnah is very short, brief notes. It's a little bit like I explained, like when in school, when you do revision notes, that's what a Mishnah is. The Gemara is a lot more detailed explanation of the Mishnah. So Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi wrote this down, and he begins by asking this amazing question. He says, what is the straight path that somebody should choose for themselves? What is the correct way to go in life? In other words, what's the best way to live as a Jew in this world? And I'm sure if I was to ask this question to this room, we'd have hundreds of opinions. What is the best way? But as we said, Pirkei Avot is life wisdom, sharing with us wisdom. What is the best path? So he says something amazing. Anything that is beautiful in the eyes of Hashem, and anything that is beautiful in your eyes and the eyes of those around you. In other words, to be a great human being, it needs to be pleasant to those around you and to God. Those are the 2 things. There are certain people who they live their life pleasing God, but perhaps are not so considerate to other people. And there are other people who are very considerate of everybody else, but don't necessarily think too much about Hashem. And the Mishnah says you need to have both sides of the coin. You need to be considerate to others, and you need to think about your relationship with the Almighty. I remember when I was in yeshiva, there was one guy, he used to daven the Amidah really loudly. And it used to really annoy me because I couldn't hear myself think. And I remember discussing this with one of the rabbis at the time, and he said, this was the Mishnah to think about. You need to, whatever you do, whatever your actions in this world, think about those 2 things. Were you pleasing in the eyes of Hashem? Were you pleasing in the eyes of God? I remember there was a guy I was in yeshiva with, actually. Amazing story. It hit the whole world press several years ago. You may have heard about the story. He was a Connecticut rabbi who bought a desk on Craigslist. He just needed a new desk for his office. I don't know if you saw this. His name was Rabbi Noach Murov. He was a friend of mine in yeshiva. And he bought this desk, and he gets it home, beautiful desk, an old antique desk, and he can't get it into his study. So his wife and him, they unscrew the desk, they pull off a side, and they find inside the desk a bag of $78,000 cash. What would you do? Right? What would you do? Ask questions later, right? You'd all start booking the cruises, thinking all the fantastic things you could do. He immediately, without hesitation, contacted the person who bought the desk from. Don't ask me how. It was an inheritance that she had lost. She had hidden it behind the desk, and somehow it slipped behind the desk. She'd lost it. She didn't know what happened to it. It was years ago. She'd forgotten about it. And she was so overwhelmed, she gave him several £1,000s reward. But this story hit the world press. It hit the world news. What I find remarkable about the story is that why does it need to hit the world news? This should be an obvious thing for all of us. But I guess we are not on that level. But this is something that's pleasing in the eyes of God, pleasing in the eyes of man, thinking about those two things. So this is the beginning of the Mishnah. Right? The Mishnah says, what is the greatest way to live? Something that's pleasing in the eyes of man, pleasing in the eyes of God. Kathy, carry on reading the Mishnah.
Then be careful with a light commandment, as with a grave one, for you did know not the reward for the fulfillment of the commandment.
Brilliant. This is one of my favorite lines in all of the Mishnah. You need to be careful with the big commandments and the small commandments. Now, can anyone please tell me, how do you define what is a big commandment, what is a small commandment? Anyone want to make a suggestion? How would you define this? The Mishnah is telling you be careful with both. But how on earth could you define
You're dying to answer.
what is a big one, what is a small one? Anyone?
I'd look at the punishments for them.
You look at the punishments,
There's
okay.
a punishment, there's a mitzvah, bigger punishment, bigger mitzvah.
But we're looking, what about looking at the rewards?
We don't know that, we just been told that.
Right, so okay, so you should be careful to fulfill the big ones and the small. That's a good way of assessing it. But the Torah is teaching us something, the Mishnah is teaching us something remarkable here. And I think you're absolutely right. Gary is right. You need to look what the punishment is. But you also need to understand that you don't start making cheshbonot, calculations, what's good, what's not good, this is an important thing, this is not important. We have an understanding that there are 613 mitzvot in the Torah. Each and every one of them are important. By the way, out of those 613, less than 100 of them are relevant to today's life. So many of them are relevant to temple times, so many of them are relevant to the land of Israel. Not all of them are relevant to today. So that kind of like eases the pressure. You think, wow, that's okay, I can handle up to 100. 613 sounds a bit too many. But the first thing to understand is God gives us instructions. Part of a relationship with God is following those instructions and not asking questions. I give the analogy to my students. Imagine I'm on the way home from work and Dina phones me, darling, on your way home, buy rice. Buy rice? We have bags of rice in the cupboard. Just buy rice. What do? I buy the rice. Why? Because I love her and she told me to. Even though I don't understand why we need rice, we have packets of rice at home, we follow our instructions of our loved ones out of love and respect. And when it comes to mitzvot, we shouldn't start asking too many questions. But why? But how? And people often make the mistake. I'll do the ethical stuff. It's nice to honor my parents. It's nice to give charity. Well, the stuff that don't really make sense to me, the red heifers of this world, the Shabbat, the Kashrut, things that are a little bit more complicated, maybe not. That's what the Mishnah is telling us. We don't start making cheshbonot. Another very important understanding of this Mishnah is what I call the frumometer, right? We try and judge people. How frum are they, right? How frum is this one? How frum is that one? No one has a frumometer on them. It's not our place in this world to make a judgment on how religious or how secular another person is. Because the Mishnah tells us we don't know the reward or punishment for any mitzvah. That's between man and God. This is one big challenge, that people are perhaps not brought up so religious. They think that they're often being judged by people who are more religious, and that shouldn't be the case. I often say to the students, imagine you've got two Jews. You've got Fred, brought up in South London, apologies for anyone who's from South London, who is brought up in an area where there are no other Jews in his community, and he's never really been to shul on Shabbat. And if you imagine, this is very abstract, there's levels 0 to 100 of spirituality. And this Fred is born on level 5, a very unspiritual life he leads. And through his life, he finds out about a few of the mitzvot. He starts fasting on Yom Kippur. He starts observing certain things. And he goes from level 5 to level 15 of spirituality through his lifetime. And then you have Moshe Chaim from Stamford Hill. And he's born on level 80 in a really religious family. And he keeps Shabbat, he keeps Kashrut, he keeps all the mitzvot, he's very observant. And through the course of his life, he takes on a few extra mitzvot. Believe it or not, there are more. And he goes from level 80 till 83. Who is greater in the eyes of God? Fred from South London, right? But our view is we are so quick to jump and challenge and view people in a certain way. It's not our job to judge people. And that's what the Mishnah is telling us. You don't know the reward for a Mishnah. You don't know what's a great mitzvah or a small mitzvah. Don't go through this world judging other people. Judaism is not supposed to be a judgment-based religion where we are judging other people on how frum they are based on perception. Rather, we're being told that every single mitzvah is full of rewards, as we spoke about a little bit last week. Hashem sends you an opportunity for a mitzvah. We do it. We do it with excitement, with energy. Right? Imagine a business deal. You have a business deal right there on the table. It's a great opportunity. You may make an amazing return. You might make a small return. But don't start asking huge questions when there's very little investment involved. Because doing a mitzvah, we try and push ourselves to succeed. Often mitzvah involve more investment, but we try our very, very best. I want to share with you a beautiful idea from last week's portion, which relates to this. We don't know the value of an action. Sometimes we do small actions in life, we have no idea of the ramifications of what this action will lead to. There's an amazing verse in last week's portion. Moses is in the wilderness, and he's about to go to war. The people of Israel are about to go to war with the nation of Sichon and Og. And Moses gets nervous. He gets fearful. Now, I don't know about you, but if you're Moses and you're God's main man, right? God's on your side. Surely you're going to war. Why would you get nervous? So Rashi gives a reason why he was nervous. Anyone know why he was nervous? Apart from Yossi? Anyone know why he was nervous? So Rashi says the following reason. Moses was nervous because of a man called Og. This nation of Og came from the descendant of a man called Og. And who was Og? Rewind several hundred centuries earlier. Remember, Abraham goes to war with the 4 kings and the 5 kings, all the way in the book of Genesis. Why does he go to war? His nephew Lot is kidnapped. Remember the story? No, Abraham has a nephew called Lot. He's kidnapped. Moses goes to save Lot. Now, how did Moses know that Lot had been kidnapped? I mean, there was no text messages, there was no Facebook, there was no BBC News.
Abraham went to save him.
How did Abraham know to go and save Lot? Where did he know from? Says the Torah that Vayovo HaPalet, the man came to tell him. Who was the man? Og. Og came to Moses and says, Moses, your nephew's been kidnapped. Why did Og do that? Was he a nice guy? No, he was actually not a nice guy. He was hoping Moses would go to war.
Abraham.
Sorry, I keep saying Moses. Abraham would go to war. Just testing. Abraham would go to war. Abraham would be killed in the war. And Sarah would be a free woman for Og to go and marry. Og liked Sarah. She was a beautiful woman. Perfect. So he did one small action for a very negative reason. But yet, because of that action, Lot was saved. And hundreds of years later, Moses is nervous to mess with Og's descendants. Because Rashi says he did one action. In other words, you have no idea of the power of even the smallest action. You think it's not a big deal. Moses himself is terrified of the ramifications of that action. I heard the most amazing story from Rabbi Fran talking about the power of a deed. Incredible story from the Holocaust, which I want to share with you. 1943, in the Krakow ghetto, or I think it was Krakow, maybe it was one of the other ghettos, one of the ghettos in Poland, in Eastern Europe. There was a couple, a young married couple who had a small child, a 3-year-old baby boy, called Shachna. And baby Shachna, young little toddler Shachna, was a little boy, and the parents they saw what was happening. They saw the writing on the wall. They realized this was not going well. And one night, in the middle of the night, the mother, she wakes up. She takes this little baby, sleeping baby, packs him away in some sort of backpack. She jumps over the ghetto walls and she escapes, and she goes through the forest to a nearby village where she knew a non-Jewish Christian family. She knocks on their door and she begs them. She says, listen, we're in serious danger. Please take in my baby. Please. If we survive the war, we'll come and collect him. And if we don't make it, please, this is the address of our cousins in Canada. Send him to Canada, make sure he's brought up as a Jew. True story. This amazing Christian family, to their credit, they take this boy in, they raise him as their own, and unfortunately the parents were both murdered in the Holocaust. both murdered in the concentration camps. Comes 1946, 1947, they realize the parents are not coming back. They take a decision to keep him as their own. He's been living with them already 4 or 5 years. He's like their own child. They say, you know what, he'll have a better future with us. We're going to raise him as a Christian child. They take him to the local church to have him baptized. And they walk into the church and they go to the priests. We want to baptize our child. The priest challenges them and says, forgive me for asking, it's a bit strange. Normally we baptize at birth. This child's 6, 7 years old. Why are you bringing him only now? Explain the story. And they say to him, this is a Jewish child. The priest says, it's not good what you're doing. It's wrong. The parents' last dying wish was that he should be brought up as a Jew. You must send this child to his cousins as they've requested. And after some time they agree, and the child goes off to America. He meets his cousins and he grows up as a Jew. He becomes actually a great rabbi in America called Rabbi Shachna Hiller. Incredible story. The footnote of the story is that this priest goes on to become Pope John Paul II. Unbelievable story. The Blushova Rebbe tells this story. He says, we don't know the power of an action. Maybe it was this one small deed that led him to become the greatest Christian in the world, who knows? But the message from the Mishnah that we're learning tonight is don't judge the size of the action that you do. Every single action, big or small, has tremendous value. So that's the point from the Mishnah. Let's carry on the Mishnah. Kathy, you're doing a great job. Finish off the Mishnah.
Also reckon the loss that may be sustained through the fulfillment of a commandment against the reward accruing thereby, and the gain that may be obtained through the committing of a transgression against the loss unpaid thereby.
Stop that. In other words, in other words, think of your actions. Is it really worth it? What you're about to do, right, is what I describe as spiritual cream cake, right? You have the cream cake, is it worth it? Of course not. The calories taste good for a minute, right? And then you repent in leisure. You sin in haste, repent in leisure, right? That's what the Mishnah is saying. In other words, if you're about to do something that's not acceptable in the eyes of the Torah, think about it. Is it really, really worth it? It's like oily foods. You enjoy it for a few minutes, and then afterwards you don't feel great from having experienced that. And finally, the last bit of the Mishnah.
Apply your mind to 3 things, and you will not come into the clutches of sin.
Okay, so you're about to hear 3 pieces of advice from the rabbis, and you'll never ever sin again. Listen carefully.
Know what there is above you, an eye that sees, an ear that hears, and all your deeds are written in a book.
3 pieces of advice. Just remember, there is an eye that sees everything that you do, there is an ear that hears, and all your deeds are written in a book. Now, 2,000 years ago, that was very hard to understand. Nowadays, with modern technology, the concept of CCTV, the concept of Facebook, Instagram, right? Just today in the press, they were talking about criminal records being wiped clean. Should we allow it? Should we not allow it? The Torah says, the Mishnah says, every single thing that you do is seen, it's recorded, and in 3 different levels. Why does it specifically say these 3 different things? Because it refers to the 3 different aspects of a human being. Machshava, thought, ma'aseh, action, and dibur, speech. Everything you think, do, or say is recorded. And therefore, think carefully about that concept. Think carefully, and one will be able to reflect on that. There was a story told, a friend of mine once met this secular woman who said, my God doesn't punish. And my friend said, really? Wow, that's amazing. Because in Judaism, that's not what we believe. In Judaism, we believe that there is schava onesh, there's reward and punishment. Of course, we don't understand the ways of God or what, how, or why, but we believe that there is this concept. It's one of Maimonides' 13 principles of faith. We believe in this idea. Recognize Hashem is watching you, and you behave differently. It's like when I'm teaching my year 9 set 6, right? Nightmare class. Believe you me, I didn't go into teaching to teach these bunch of kids. They are jumping off the wall, etc., etc. When the head teacher walks into the classroom, it's as if they're all angels. Suddenly she walks into the classroom, she sits in the back row. What's changed, right? Suddenly, when there's somebody watching you carefully, all of a sudden, things change. And this, by the way, is the whole idea of bechira, free will, right? We have free will to act any way we want because we don't live with that constant recognition of God in our life. If we constantly believed God was in our life, we would act very differently. That's why, by the way, what do you see on every Aron HaKodesh, almost every Aron HaKodesh, you see the line, Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. Hashem is always in my presence. In other words, wherever you are, it's the first line of the Shulchan Aruch as well. God is always in your presence. If you live your life really with that thought close to you, you become a different person, or at least you should. You place God at the forefront of your actions. You speak nicer to your children. You speak softer to your spouse. You are more careful on your tax return. You speed less. You drive more carefully. Because you've got this idea that someone's always watching you, right? I remember I once did a road trip with a friend. We drove from New York to Florida. We drove all the way down. And I'm actually a wanted man in Virginia. I got a speeding ticket in Virginia. And I was driving. It was about 2 a.m. And all of a sudden the lights come on. It was like out of a film. Place your hands outside the vehicle, right? I put my hands outside the window. And it was actually a funny story because he wrote me a ticket. But in America, they do the date, the month, and then the date. So he wrote it the wrong way around because of my driving license. It really threw him. And he wrote, instead of 21st of the 3rd, he wrote 3rd of the 21st. And when I phoned to try and pay the ticket, they said it's an invalid ticket because he's given it to you wrong. So I got away with it. But but the idea is, whenever you do anything, there's someone always watching you. There's someone always watching you, and that is what the Mishnah is trying to teach us. Okay. Moving on to next Mishnah, please. Volunteer to read. Gary, go for it. Mishnah Bet.
Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yonni, said, "Excellent is the study of the Torah when combined with a worldly occupation, for toil in the boat keeps sin out of one's mind. But study of the Torah, which is not combined with a worldly occupation, in the end comes to be neglected and becomes the cause of sin. And all who labor with the community should labor with them for the sake of heaven."
Pause there a second. Okay, pause there a second. So this first idea is we see how beautiful it is when you have Torah, Yofet Talmud Torah in Derech Eretz. This concept of Torah, Judaism, combined with the ways of the world. Now the Mefarshim discuss at length, what is this referring to? Does anyone want to take a guess? What does it mean, living your life with these two aspects, Torah and Derech Eretz? Does anyone want to make a suggestion what this might be referring to? Feel free to join in. It's, I don't want you just to listen to me the whole time. Anyone want to make any suggestion?
Yeah, being involved in the world,
Being involved in the world.
in daily life.
Being involved in real life, right? So there are various, you're absolutely right, there are various mafarshim on this. First of all, having a secular education and a Jewish education. Some people say it's referring to that. Some people say it's being involved with the world. Some people it's having an understanding and knowledge of the natural world. When you enjoy, tonight I told my kids a bedtime story, it was a nature story about different animals. When you see the beauty of creation, you recognize God in the world. I remember I once did an Eish HaTorah fellowships trip. We went to Niagara Falls. And I remember afterwards, one of the rabbis, he wanted to call God Mr. Niagara. Because it was so magnificent, so beautiful, so awesome. We did this boat ride, I don't know if any of you have done it, it's called the Maid of the Mist. Unbelievable trip. And I remember when I went on this boat, there was a blind woman on the boat. And I said to my friends, why, I don't get it. She's blind, why is she paying a lot of money to go on this boat ride? But the reality was, she enjoyed it more than any of us. The noises she was making, the appreciation of the mist, of the sounds, of the awesomeness of it, she took it all in. Because when you really appreciate nature, you appreciate God. So that's one understanding. Derech Eretz and Torah, enjoy the natural world and you'll understand Torah more. Another one is earning a livelihood.
Being in business.
Being in business, but using that to support yourself to live a Torah lifestyle. Some say it's talking about Derech Eretz having good midot, good character traits. It's not enough just to learn Torah if you're then rude or swindle other people in business. You have to apply Derech Eretz, the ways of the world. And the quintessential role model for this, perhaps, was Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. Samson Raphael Hirsch, who is the founding father of really modern orthodoxy. This idea of being a Jew in the world. You don't just need to be a Jew in your synagogues or in your homes, but you can be a Jew in the workplace. And you can be the greatest Torah scholar and the greatest doctor and the greatest accountant and teacher and whatever it may be. You don't need to just kind of confine yourself just to be a Jew in your own environments, but you can be a Jew in the outside world as well. And this perhaps is what this Mishnah is alluding to. The end of the Mishnah talks about this idea, if you just want to finish the Mishnah.
And all who labor with the community should labor with them for the sake of heaven, for the merit of their forefathers sustains them the community. And there the forefathers' righteousness endures forever. And as for you, God in such case says, I credit you with a rich reward if you yourselves have actually accomplished this.
So we're going to come back to this in a couple of minutes in one of the following Mishnayot. But this idea of toiling for the sake of heaven, being involved in your community is so important in Judaism, and getting involved to actively take part is considered very important. Okay, Mishnah number 3. Volunteer. Chloe,
Thank you.
go for it.
Be careful when you're dealings with the ruling authorities, for they do not befriend a person except for their own needs. They seem like friends when it is to their own interest, but they do not stand by a man in the hour of his distress.
Okay, so this is a fascinating Mishnah. It's talking about the idea of how people are often self-interested. The authorities are certainly self-interested, and be cautious of them. Again, this is talking more about ancient times as well, right, where there was really a fear of the authorities. Hopefully nowadays there's more peace between us and our authorities, but this is what the Mishnah is referring to. So this is a very, very interesting idea of not being distrusting, but just being careful, watching yourself. This is, again, as I said last week, the whole of Pirkei Avot is life advice. Okay, Mishnah 4. Can we hear from someone? Anyone on this side? Go on, Marcus. Mishnah 4.
You used to say, do his will as though it were your will, so that he will do your will as though it were his.
Okay, pause there. Do his will as though it was your will, and he will do his will as though it's your will. This is a bit of like a riddle almost. What on earth is this referring to?
Does that mean like man is made in the image of God?
Potentially, yeah. But it's talking about your relationship both with you and God, but your relationship with you and other people, particularly with your life partner. You know, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, he used to say that your fellow human being is like a mirror. Beautiful idea. That if your own face is clean, when you see other people, you'll see a clean face. If you see blemishes in other people, it often means you have blemishes yourself. In other words, and I guess modern psychology would talk about this as a term for it in modern psychology, when you look at other people and you kind of reflect projection, right? This is the first source of projection, right? Modern psychology have only been talking about this for the last couple of 100 years. The Torah is talking about this 2,000 years ago, ancient wisdom. When you look at other people, don't project onto them the way you're feeling. That's not an appropriate way to be.
Yonni,
Yeah.
I don't understand because it says his and he with a capital letter, so it looks like it's talking about God.
Absolutely, but all relationships in this world are a metaphor for your relationship between you and God. In other words, the relationship between a husband and wife is supposed to enable you not only to have a loving relationship, but to ultimately have an amazing relationship between you and the Almighty. And that's what we're trying to get to. And this analogy of a clear mirror is a good way of perhaps understanding what this is referring to. So that's point number 1 of this Mishnah. Carry on. Hillel said, who was reading? Marcus, sorry. Hillel said,
Weren't they? Shall I carry on from there?
No, go back on.
Hillel said, do not separate yourself from the community. Do not trust in yourself until the day of your death. Do not judge your fellow man until you have reached his place. Do not say something that cannot be understood, but in the end it will be understood. Say not, when I shall have leisure, I shall study. Perhaps you will not have leisure.
okay, amazing, famous Mishnah. First of all, do not separate yourself from your community. There's actually, in the Shulchan Aruch, it describes there is a prohibition from separating yourself from the community. In other words, imagine you go to the synagogue and they are davening in one manner and you choose to daven in a different manner. For example, you go to an Ashkenazic minyan and you want to daven a Sephardic davening. All the things you do quietly is fine. The thing you do out loud, you shouldn't do. You shouldn't separate yourself from the community. Or if everyone in the community is clubbing together to try and support a certain cause, and you say, no, I'm going to support a different cause, you should try and feel involved in your community and not separate yourself from your community. And I heard a beautiful explanation of this, especially in the run-up to the High Holy Days. One of the ways we are promised to have a good judgment in the year to come is that we get involved in community life. And somebody once explained to me in the following way. There's a story told of a boy doing an exam. You may have heard this story, it's a famous story. He's sitting in the exam hall, he's writing his paper, and the examiner says, 10 minutes left. 10 minutes, tick-tock, goes by, 1 minute left, paper's down. And everyone puts the paper down except for this one boy who keeps writing. The examiner walks around, he collects all the papers. This one boy is still writing, he's shaking his head thinking this boy is going to be disqualified from the exam. And 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes go by. This boy's writing vigorously. All the other people have left the exam hall and the examiner's collecting up all the papers, shaking his head. The boy goes to the front desk after 15 minutes And the examiner says, I'm not accepting that. And the boy says, do you know who I am? The examiner says, no, I don't care who you are. Do you know who my father is? No. You have no idea who I am? No. The boy picks up the pile of papers, he stuffs his in the middle, and he runs out the room. And he gets away with it.
Good one.
This is a good way to understand this Mishnah. Do not separate yourself from the community. In other words, why do we daven with a minyan? What's the whole idea of a minyan? Why can't I just daven in my living room? Why do I need to go every day to the synagogue, 3 times a day, shachrit, mincha, mariv? Why can't you just be by yourself? Because Judaism is telling us we shouldn't be isolated. We rely on the community. And everyone in the community brings different strengths. You've got the people who are very great intellects. You've got the people with a great heart. The people who bring other talents. The people who bring charity work, whatever it may be. When you come together, then you have a community.
So my controversial statement of last week, which you absolutely slammed me, embarrassed me in front of 50 people.
Oh, come on.
Which was about the Haredi, where they're separated themselves off. Are you then defining the community as being the Haredi community or the Haredi community within the wider world?
Don't separate yourself from your own community, right?
Okay, now you're being a bit picky,
they would argue that they're part of their community. We had this amazing speaker the other month, came to St. John's Wood, Ari Pfefferkorn, and he came and spoke about Hasidic life and the bridges that he's trying to build. And
good
as
example.
I said to you last week, right? I said to you last week, we see always the best and worst of every community. There's always exceptions. There's always people who do things the appropriate way. But there is so much good in the Haredi community as well. And yeah, you're right. But no one should separate themselves from any community. There's a certain love that you feel towards your fellow Jew. And you should feel that wherever you are. I remember once I was in Tel Aviv Canyon with Dina one summer holiday, and I needed to daven mincha. And there was no one to daven mincha, so there's a synagogue in the Canyon. I went to the synagogue, not one Jew in sight. It was almost sunset. I'm thinking, I'm in Tel Aviv with all the Jews, why is no one coming to daven mincha? I wanted a minyan. So I came up with a genius idea. I saw all these teenagers, shababniks, not religious, standing around this ice cream counter in the Canyon. I said, guys, I'll give you each 5 shekel towards your ice cream if you come and daven mincha with me. They thought I was crazy. They really thought I was crazy, but I had a minyan there and then in the Tachana Merkazeh. I'll tell you another beautiful story. There was a beautiful story. There was a Jew, a businessman. He was saying Kaddish for his father. And he was in Israel on business, and he landed late at night. He gets to his hotel. He's in Jerusalem. He's just about to fall asleep on his pillow. He realizes, I didn't daven Mariv. I need to say Kaddish for my father. It's 2 a.m. Where am I possibly going to find a minyan at 2 a.m? Goes out of his hotel, he gets dressed, he gets into a cab, and he goes to the synagogue in Meh Sha'arim. He's hedging his bets. He's thinking, if I'm going to find a minyan anywhere, in deep, dark Meh Sha'arim, that might be the only place. He gets there 2 a.m, not one other Jew there. So what does he do? Clever guy. He phones the taxi company and he says, can you send me 10 taxis? I need 10 taxis. They send him 10 taxis. And he says to all of them, guys, put your meters on. I will pay your meters. Come in, we're going to daven minyan. Now, all these Sephardi taxi drivers, they knew everything. They come out, they have their kippot, their siddur. They come in, they're very excited. Not one of those taxi drivers would accept a penny to their credit. Not one of them wanted a penny. It's a beautiful story. This is what it means being part of a community. And this guy wasn't from their community, they weren't from his community. There is a certain kinship, or at least there should be, between every single type of Jew, whatever background they come from. Okay, so moving on. Where are we up to? He said, do not separate yourself from the community. Do not trust yourself until the day of your death. In other words, you always have a yetzer hara. You always have an evil inclination. Even if you are 100 years old or 18 years old, there is always a desire to do things that you shouldn't be doing. And therefore, don't trust yourself that you can't do wrong. Do not judge your fellow man until you've reached his place. This is a very, very important Mishnah. We said Judaism is not supposed to be a judgmental religion. Sometimes, unfortunately, we feel it. We feel we're being judged. We shouldn't feel we're being judged, and we shouldn't judge other people, whether they're from the Haredi camp, the secular camp, any type of camp, whoever they are. We are inclusive. At least we should be. This is what the Torah is teaching us. We don't judge anyone until you've reached his place. Rabbi Yonni, on his commentary on this, has a beautiful idea. What does it mean until you've reached his place? It means never. Because you're never going to reach the place of another human being. You're never going to be born into his circumstances or her circumstances, with their family backgrounds, with their outlook. You're never going to reach that person's place, so don't ever make a judgment on other people as long as you live. Do not say something that cannot be understood, that in the end will be understood. In other words, try and be straightforward, be trusting, and don't say, when I have time I will learn. right? I often have this. People say, yeah, Rabbi, we must do some learning. We must get together. I'll text you. I'll call you, right? And it doesn't happen. The Jewish idea is when you have time, you make time. You don't push things off. What can be done today, don't push off till tomorrow. This is really, really important. Okay. I think we'll have time. How are we doing for time? We have time for one more Mishnah? Yeah? Try to do one more Mishnah. Okay. Next Mishnah. Please do us the honor of reading it.
He used to say,
Someone still coming.
a brute is not sin-fearing, nor is an ignorant person pious, nor can a timid person learn, nor can an impatient person teach, nor will someone who engages too much in business become wise. In a place where there are no men, strive to be a man.
Okay, we have someone translating the Spanish now.
Okay. Beautiful.
So he's got a problem with the hearing.
Touché.
Okay. A really, really beautiful Mishnah that talks about the various qualities we should try and adopt in this world. And it's even more beautiful in the Hebrew, for those of you who understand the Hebrew. And I want to just try and analyze some of the words of this Mishnah. Right? Ein bar yerechet. Somebody who's a brute is not going to be God-fearing. In other words, to be a God-fearing human being, you've got to be humble. You've got to be modest in the way in which you act. In every aspect of life. That is what it means to be God-fearing. Somebody who is ignorant is not going to be able to be righteous. In order to be truly righteous, you need to learn to understand what it is that you are trying to achieve, and the best way of doing that is studying. Somebody who's shy isn't going to be able to learn. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Right, we sometimes do this from the pulpit. We do a Q&A on High Holy Days. In the classroom, I do it the whole time. The Mishnah says there's nothing like a stupid question. You should ask every question. Right, it's so important to ask a question. I was telling on Shabbat a story about Moshe Shapiro, who was one of the great rabbis of the last generation. Moshe Shapiro was a very strict rabbi, very fearsome. And in his class, his students were sometimes nervous to ask questions. And once one guy, I'll put his hand up, one of his students, and to be in his class, you have to be pretty great yourself. And he asked a question, and he looked at him and he goes, "That's not even a stupid question." Right? 5 minutes later, this guy obviously had some very thick skin. He asked another question. He goes, "Oh, now that's a stupid question." Right? Sometimes we are nervous to ask questions, and really, you should never be shy to ask a rabbi a question. Maybe sometimes publicly isn't appropriate, but privately, always feel free to ask questions. The Mishnah is telling us the importance of asking questions. Judaism is a religion of questions. The whole Gemara is questions. This question, that question, backwards, forwards, to try and get to the answers. We don't say blind faith. We don't say we just accept and do. We always ask questions, right? But that's a really, really important idea. And lastly, the Mishnah says, in a place where there isn't a man, try and stand up to be a man. In other words, we have a responsibility. Some more psychology from Pirkei Avot. The bystander effect. Are you familiar with the bystander effect? Right? If you're in a situation where no one is standing up, you need to stand up and do the right thing. Right? They do lots of these social experiments based on this concept called the bystander effect. They took a child to central London, I think to Piccadilly Circus, and they acted out this scene that he was being kidnapped and put into a van in broad daylight, hundreds of people passing by, not one person stopped. You may remember the story of Kitty Genovese. Right? Kitty Genovese was a woman who was murdered in New York in March 1964. She was a young woman. She came home from work late one night. She was stabbed to death brutally. 37 witnesses were looking out of their apartment block watching. They saw with their own eyes. 37 witnesses. Not one of them contacted the police. They all assumed somebody else will do it. They could have stopped it. They could have saved her. This is what we call the bystander effect. The Mishnah was telling us, "B'mokom she'ein ish, hishtadal liyos ish." You need to try and stand up to other people. This is really, really important, to try and make sure that you stand up to other people. Okay, we're going to skip the next Mishnah. We're going to move to Mishnah 9, just for lack of time, and we're going to conclude with this final Mishnah this evening. Mishnah 9. Volunteers to read.
Like 7.
We're going to go straight to 9, okay? If you want to go through with any of them with me privately afterwards, I'm happy to. Mishnah 9, Graham, go for it. Read it for us.
Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai received the tradition from Hillel and Shammai. He used to say, if you have studied much Torah, do not
No, 9.
9.
You're the wrong book.
Omolan Su'uru. Yeah?
Your book.
Yochanan he said to them, go forth and observe which is the right way to which a man should cleave. Rabbi Eliezer said, a good eye. Rabbi Yehoshua said, a good companion. Rabbi Yosef said, a good neighbor. Rabbi Shimon said, foresight. Rabbi Elazar said, a good heart.
Pause there. I spoke at one of the nights of the Shiva in the synagogue, and I quoted this Mishnah when describing Russell. I think this Mishnah really says it all. What is the right way a person should go in this world? He should try and have the following qualities. Rabbi Elazar says somebody with a good eye. What does it mean, a good eye? Somebody who sees the good in situation. Somebody who is an optimist. Somebody who sees the cup half full. That's what Rabbi Elazar says. Rabbi Yeshua says chovetov. Somebody who is a good friend. We all got friends, but who is the friend that we phone when we're in real trouble? Who is the friend that we're happy to phone at 3 a.m. when we're in trouble? Right? How many of those friends can you count on your hands? You know, the kids have nowadays so many thousands of friends on social media, but are they real friends? Being a chovet tov, that's what the Mishnah says. Ayin tova, a good eye. Rabbi Yeshua Omer says chovet tov. Rabbi Yossi Omer says shochen tov, a good neighbor. Right? It's very nice to be a friend when the times are good, but being a friend also when things are not so good. A neighbor who is somebody who's there for you always. Somebody who's living next to you. Rabbi Shimon says haroa es hanolad, somebody who has foresight. It's very easy to have foresight with hindsight, but being able to see the consequences of your actions is so important.
Yonni,
Yeah.
is it significant that these are all incredibly learned rabbis and they all say something different? And were they asked at a different time? Were they told not to say something that the other rabbis have said?
Well, it's a very good question. So they all had these kind of real things that they stood for. They all had different views of what was the most important thing. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Leiv Tov, he says a good heart. And then the Mishnah goes on to say what are the opposite things that are bad, the bad qualities, some that you should distance yourself, somebody who's got an iron rod, somebody who's got a begrudging eye, somebody who's a bad friend, a bad neighbor, and somebody who has the opposite of this. And this is really, I think, something important to end with. We're here tonight paying tribute to Russell through learning Torah. It's quite remarkable how many of you have come. It's I must tell you, it's really humbling for me to see so many of you here. And myself, Rabbi Menzel, Diane Binstock, are just amazed at the response of what's been happening in our community in the week of the Shiva. But coming together to learn Torah, I think, is the biggest tribute we can do. What we're going to do now is we're going to conclude here. I'm going to say Kaddish in a couple of minutes. And please God, we're going to have one more week next week. And then we're going to restart after the summer holidays on the 9th of September.
Yeah, so next week is in Gary Phillips's house. So next week is in Keith Breslau's house.
Yeah.
And then we're going to do the second Monday of September, which will be in Gary Phillips's house, if Fiona says okay.
No pressure. Rabbi Chanana Bakasha Omer Rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lezakos Es Yisrael Lefikach Hebol Lahem Torah Mitzvah Shenema Adonai Chafetz L'Matzit Ko